May it please the tribunal, I've been charged by the Chief Counsel for the United States with the duty of pointing out, on the basis of evidence already admitted and of additional evidence that will be offered, the individual responsibility of some of these defendants for the crimes specified in counts 1 and 2 of the indictment. When these defendants chose to abandon everything that had been recognized as good in German life and affirmatively participated in the work of achieving the objectives of the party, we submit that they well knew what National Socialism stood for. They knew of the program announced by the Nazi Party, and they also had knowledge of Nazi methods. The official NSDAP program, with its 25 points, was open and notorious. Announced and published to the world in 1920, it was published and republished and adverted to throughout the years. The Nazis made no secret of their intentions to make the party program the fundamental law of the German state. The Nazis made no secret of their intentions generally. For all to read, there was Mein Kampf, the product of the warped brain of the Führer, and there were the prolific writings and utterances of many other leaders who rose to prominence, some of whom are now sitting in the defendant's box. And Hitler himself had announced that the Nazis would use force if necessary to achieve their purposes. Among the conspirators, there were those who, like the defendants Hess, Rosenberg, and Goering, who were associated with Hitler from the very inception of the conspiracy. These men were among the original planners. They were the men who subsequently set the pace and cast the mold for the future. But there were also other conspirators. The balance of the defendants in the box fit into this category, who voluntarily joined the conspiracy later. Now, while these men may be characterized, perhaps, as cruel or callous or inhuman, they certainly may not be called dull or stupid. They knew and had had the opportunity to observe the manifestations of Nazi violence and Nazi methods as the pattern of the swastika developed. They knew the nature of what they were getting into. Therefore, they must be presumed to have had the desire to participate, and participate they did, voluntarily. And so we submit that it may not validly be inferred that they did not join the stream of the conspiracy with their eyes open, with scienter, as the conspiracy gathered momentum and developed into a rushing torrent. Much evidence has already been admitted by the tribunal of the overt acts of these defendants, as well as of their fellow conspirators. We shall make no effort at this time to present an exhaustive recital of all crimes planned or initiated by these defendants, for which they must bear full responsibility beyond peradventure of doubt. The world already knows more of the evil deeds of these men and of their co-conspirators than the prosecution possibly could hope to establish within the reasonable limits of time and of men's patience. At this point, we shall attempt to focus attention merely to illustrative criminal conduct of the individual conspirators. There is an advantage to proceeding, we submit, as we propose to do, with the permission of the tribunal, to show an outline, the extent to which these defendants have become implicated in the serious charges against them. In the case of many of these conspirators, a recital of their crimes will relate to their planning of the several categories of crimes described in counts 1 and 2 of the indictment. We shall draw these various threads together and show, as I've said, the outline of the completed proof, as it were, within count 1 of the indictment against the individual conspirators. Thus, on behalf of the United States, I shall commence to show how some of these defendants fit into the broad stream of the conspiracy to wage aggressive war, and the extent of their individual responsibility for their acts in pursuance of that conspiracy. First of all, we mention the late defendant Robert Lye, who by recourse to self-destruction has escaped all punishment for his participation in the conspiracy. Next we mention Gustav Krupp von Bohlen and Halbach, the action against whom has been severed from this proceeding. Nevertheless, it should be noted that documentary proof has been offered and will be offered in support of the allegations of the indictment that implicate both Lye and Krupp as co-conspirators for whose crimes the remaining defendants also must accept responsibility. Next, we consider the defendant Fritz Sauckel. The case against Sauckel has been completely stated and supported by a wealth of damning evidence by my learned colleague, Mr. Dodd, in his presentation of the case on slave labor. We submitted that it is unnecessary to add anything further to the case against Sauckel to demonstrate how completely he filled his place in the stream of the conspiracy. The next defendant to be considered is Albert Speer. Like his fellow conspirator Sauckel, Speer is deeply implicated as a member of the conspiracy, and much of the case against him has been presented by Mr. Dodd in the case of slave labor. But unlike Sauckel, Speer's criminal activity went substantially beyond the realm of slave labor. His was one of the masterminds in the plan for the systematic robbery and despoliation of the lands overrun by the German war machine. Documentary proof of Speer's participation in the spoliation practices in the countries of Western Europe, as well as in the eastern territories occupied by them, will be presented subsequently by our learned colleagues, the chief prosecutor representing the Soviet Union, and by the chief French prosecutor under the remaining counts of the indictment. That is essentially the case that proves Speer to have been a member of the conspiracy. There is, however, one additional exhibit that I would like to offer into evidence at this time. It was received only a few days ago from the Ministerial Document Center at Kassel, and it is a dossier maintained on the defendant Speer in the offices of the Reichsführer SS. I offer this file as Exhibit USA 575. This is our document 3568. And I shall read from the dossier
3568 PS.
3568 PS, if your honor please. What book is it in? That is in volume 3 of the 3 volumes before your honor.
Oh, we haven't got it. The Goering ones, and then put in. Have we got 3 volumes before us? No, 2 volumes. We got 2 volumes before. I should have mentioned that. 1, 2, 3. You got it?
It's volume 3. It is in volume 3, if it may please the court, of
yes, 3 volumes 3.
document books double D.
Yes.
I shall read from the letter dated the 25th of July, 1942, from the second paragraph. Reichsminister Speer was enrolled as an SS man on the personal staff of the Reichsführer SS under SS number 46104 with effect from the 20th of July 1942 by order of the Reichsführer SS. I think that is all I need to read from that letter, but I should like to call the tribunal's attention to the annexed document, which is a questionnaire, and right at the beginning of the same, it is related that Albert Speer was in the SS since the autumn of 1932. He was in the SA from March 1, 1931 until autumn 1932, and that his membership number in the party was 474481. I next mention the defendant Ernst Kaltenbrunner, whose case has been completely presented in connection with the presentation on the Gestapo and the SD as criminal organizations. We submit that further proof is not needed to prove how completely this enemy of his own fatherland, Austria, has been carried along in the stream of the conspiracy. We pass then to the case of perhaps the most important conspirator on trial before this tribunal, the number 2 Nazi, the Nazi who stood next to the Führer himself, the Nazi who was in some respects even more dangerous than the Führer and other leading party leaders. We say that he was more dangerous because, unlike many leading Nazis, including Hitler, who were morally and socially on the fringes of society before the Nazi Party rode to success in 1933, this conspirator was known to come of substantial family, which had furnished officers to the army and important civil servants to the country in the past. Moreover, he was possessed of substantial appearance, an ingratiating manner, a certain affability. But all of these facets of character were but deceptions, because they helped to conceal the man's core of steel, his vindictiveness, his cruelty, his lust for self-adornment, self-glorification, and power. This man was most dangerous, furthermore, because the outward characteristics to which I have called attention, and which he has to some extent demonstrated here in the presence of the tribunal, were useful in deceiving the representatives of foreign states, who in their concern sought to learn from him the true intentions of the Nazi state, which by its repeated floutings of its international commitments had so seriously disturbed the tranquility of the world since 1933. And I think that the record should show how throughout the earlier stages of this trial, that is, before the nature of the documentary evidence offered by the prosecution became too grim and almost implausible, much of the benevolence of this conspirator, his ever-ready smile and ingratiating manner, were daily in evidence in this chamber. His ready affirmation, by a pleasant nod for all to see, of the correctness of statements made or the contents of documents offered by counsel, his chiding shake of the head when he disagreed with such facts, were commonplace.
I don't think so, Albrecht.
I shall pass on then with the presentation, with the permission of the tribunal, and I shall give an account of certain facts already established by the documents in evidence, and with the permission of the tribunal, I shall not, unless it is so wished, refer to the exhibit numbers or citations of most of the old evidence that I shall allude to. These are all set forth in the trial brief that has already been distributed. Against the background of this factual account, into which we have drawn the main threads of the case already presented, that show the complicity of the defendant Goering, we shall offer certain additional documentary evidence which we believe necessary to demonstrate Goering's connection with and responsibility for certain phases of the conspiracy. I should have said before, if Your Honors please, that there has been distributed and is now before you 3 volumes of document books bearing the letters D, which contain substantially all the documents, new as well as old, bearing on the individual responsibility of this defendant.
Did you say they ought to be marked D?
I had so understood, Your Honor.
Very well.
We shall first deal with the individual responsibility of this conspirator for the crimes against peace. These crimes include Goering's participation in the acquisition and consolidation of power in Germany, the economic and military preparations for war, and the waging of aggressive war. For more than 2 decades, Goering's activities extended over nearly every phase of the conspiracy. He was one of the conspirators associated with Hitler from the very beginning. A member of the party since 1922, he participated in the Munich Putsch of November 1923 at the head of the SA, a Nazi organization shown to have been committed to the use of violence. Goering fled to the country after the putsch in order to escape arrest. After his return, he became more than a commander of street fighters. He was designated Hitler's first political assistant. A measure of the man may be gleaned from an exhibit already in evidence, namely Gritzbach's official biography of Goering, in which are recorded his dealings with the Brunner government, his attempts to break down the barrier around President von Hindenburg, his coup as Reichstag president in September 1932 in procuring a vote of no confidence against the von Papen government just before the Reichstag was dissolved. Goering's writings show him not to be backward in taking credit for his efforts to advance the cause of the...
A little bit too fast.
For his efforts to advance the cause of the party. Full credit has also been accorded him by Hitler, and Goering has boasted that no title and no decoration could make him so proud as the designation given him by the German people, and I quote, the most faithful paladin of the Führer. That short quotation, may please the court, comes from our USA Exhibit 233, our document 3251 PS. With the advent of the Nazis to power in January 1933, Goering became acting Minister of the Interior and Prime Minister of Prussia. In these capacities, he proceeded promptly to establish a regime of terror in Prussia designed to suppress all opposition to the Nazi program. His chief tool in that connection was the Prussian police, which remained under his jurisdiction until 1936. As early as February 1933, he directed the entire police force to render unqualified assistance to the paramilitary organizations supporting the new government, such as the SA and the SS, and to crush all political opponents with firearms, if necessary, and regardless of the consequences. The tribunal will take judicial notice of the directives of the 10th and 17th of February 1933, which are cited on page 7 of our brief, and which appear in that collection of decrees known as the Ministerialblatt für die preußische innere Verwaltung of 1933. Goering has frequently and proudly acknowledged his personal responsibility for the crimes committed pursuant to orders of this character. And I recall his words which he uttered before thousands of his fellow Germans. Each bullet which leaves the barrel of a police pistol now is my bullet. If one calls this murder, then I have murdered. I ordered all this. I back it up. I assume the responsibility, and I'm not afraid to do so. That quotation, may it please the tribunal, comes from our exhibit USA 233, already in evidence, our document 2324 PS. Soon after he became Prime Minister of Prussia, in pursuance of the conspiracy, Goering began to develop the Gestapo, or secret state police, the details of which organization of terror were presented to the court by my learned colleague, Colonel Story. As early as the 26th of April, 1933, he signed the first law officially establishing the Gestapo in Prussia. And pursuant to a decree which he signed, he named himself as Prime Minister, Chief of the Prussian Secret State Police. Goering was undoubtedly an efficient conspirator. He was impatient to consolidate the power of the party at home. Already in spring 1933, the concentration camps were established in Prussia. Men and women, so-called Marxists, and other political opponents, taken into custody by the Gestapo, were thrown into concentration camps without trial. Goering said, "Against the enemies of the state, we must proceed ruthlessly." That statement appears in our document 2344 PS, which is already in evidence as USA Exhibit 233. The range of political terrorism under his leadership was almost limitless. A glance at a few of his police directives in those early days will indicate the extent and thoroughness with which every dissident voice was silenced. I asked the tribunal to take judicial notice of some of these decrees in the same collection I mentioned a short while ago, entitled the Ministerialblatt für die preußische innere Verwaltung. And we have cited these decrees on pages 9 and 10 of our brief. These include a directive of the 22nd of June 1933, which required all officials to watch the statements of civil service and to denounce to the defendant Goering those who made critical remarks. The failure to make such reports was to be regarded as proof of hostile attitude. Then there was the directive of the 23rd of June, 1933, which suppressed all activities of the Social Democratic Party, including meetings and the party press, and ordered the confiscation of its property. There was the directive of the 30th of June, 1933, which directed the Gestapo authorities to report to the labor trustees on the political attitude of the workers. There was the directive of the 15th of January, 1934, which ordered the Gestapo and the frontier police to keep track of emigres, particularly political emigres and Jews residing in neighboring countries, and to arrest them and to put them in concentration camps if they returned to Germany. The essential ruthlessness of Goering is further illustrated by a well-known bloody episode. After the elimination of the forces of the opposition, the Nazis felt it necessary to dispose of nonconformists within their own ranks. This they accomplished in what has become known as the Rome Purge of the 30th of June, 1934. The defendant Frick, a chief conspirator in his own right, stated in that connection in an affidavit that many people were murdered who had nothing to do with the internal SA revolt, but who were just not liked very well. Goering's role in this sordid affair was related less than 2 weeks after the event by Hitler in a speech to the Reichstag. And I would like to offer in evidence as USA Exhibit 576 our document 3442 PS, in which is contained the speech of Hitler made on the 13th of July 1934 in the Reichstag. It is published in Das Archiv, volumes 4 to 6, at page 505. I quote, "Meanwhile, Minister President Goering had already received my instructions that in case of a purge, he was to take analogous measures at once in Berlin and in Prussia. With an iron fist, he beat down the attack on the National Socialist state before it could develop." End of quotation. With the accession of the Nazis to power, Goering at once assumed a number of the highest and most influential positions also in the Reich. The proof already presented on the composition and functions of the Reich's cabinet and of the offices held by Goering shows him to have been, in fact, the most important executive of the Nazi state. A member of the Reichstag since 1928 and its president since 1932, he was a member of the cabinet from the beginning as Reich Minister without portfolio. Shortly thereafter, he received the portfolio as Reich Minister for Air. When in an early meeting, the cabinet discussed the pending Enabling Act, which gave the cabinet plenary powers of legislation, he offered the suggestion that the required two-thirds majority might be obtained simply by refusing admittance to social democratic delegates. I offer in evidence as USA Exhibit 578 our document 2962 PS, which contain the minutes of that meeting. If your honors will note that that meeting was held on the 15th of March 1933, and there were present, besides the defendant Goering, the defendants von Papen, von Neurath, Frick, and Funk. I read from page 6 of that document. Reich Minister Goering expressed his conviction that the Enabling Act would be passed with the necessary two-thirds majority. Possibly a majority could be obtained by banishing several Social Democrats from the hall. Possibly the Social Democrats would even refrain from voting on the Enabling Act. End of quotation. In 1935, with the unmasking of a secret Luftwaffe, Goering became its commander-in-chief. He sat as a member of the Führer's deputy on the Reich Defense Council, established by the secret law of the 21st of May, 1933. The purpose of that council was, as stated by the defendant Frick, in an affidavit that is in evidence, and I quote, to plan preparations and decrees in case of war, which later on were published by the Ministerial Council for the Defense of the Reich. His assumption of ever greater responsibility seemed limitless. In 1936, Goering was made plenipotentiary for the four-year plan, whereby he acquired plenary legislative and administrative powers over all German economic life. In 1938, he became a member of the Secret Cabinet Council, which had been established to act as an advisory board in the direction of foreign policy. The Ministerial Council for the Defense of the Reich, created in 1939, took over in effect all of the legislative powers of the cabinet, which had not been reserved otherwise, and Goering became its chairman. His efficient and ruthless services were recognized by Hitler in 1939 when he designated Goering as his successor, as heir apparent of the new order. In April 1936, Goering was appointed coordinator for raw materials and foreign exchange, and empowered to supervise all state and party activities in these fields. I offer, in support of that fact, as USA Exhibit 577, our document 2827 PS, which is an excerpt from Rühle, Das Dritte Reich. I read from the fourth paragraph of the excerpt, if Your Honor please, which is an excerpt from a decree signed by Hitler, and it reads as follows. Prime Minister Colonel General Goering will take the measures necessary for the accomplishment of the tasks given to him, and has the authority to issue decrees and general administrative directives. He, for this purpose, is authorized to question and issue directives to all authorities, including the highest Reich authorities and all agencies of the party, its formations, and attached organizations. In this capacity, Goering convened the War Minister, the Defendant Schacht as Minister of Economics and President of the Reichsbank, and the Finance Minister for the Reich and the State of Prussia, to discuss interagency problems connected with war mobilization. At a meeting of this group on the 12th of May, 1936, when the question of prohibitive cost of synthetic raw material substitutes arose, Goering decided, if we have war tomorrow, we must help ourselves by substitutes. Then money will not play any role at all. If that is the case, then we must be ready to create the prerequisites for that in peace. A few days later, on the 27th of May, 1936, at a meeting of the same group, Goering opposed any limitations dictated by orthodox financial policies. he said that all measures are to be considered from the standpoint of an assured waging of war. The well-known four-year plan was proclaimed by Hitler at the 1936 Nuremberg Party Day. Goering was appointed plenipotentiary in charge of the program, which was intended to achieve national self-sufficiency. Furthermore, Goering commented in 1936 that his chief task as plenipotentiary was to put the whole economy on a war footing within 4 years. And I would like to offer into evidence as USA Exhibit 579 our document EC 408.
EC.
So that I may direct the tribunal's attention to a memorandum dated the 30th of December 1936 of the Defense Division of the Wehrmacht, entitled Memorandum on the Four-Year Plan and Preparation of the War Economy. And on the third paragraph of the translation, or at page 2 in the middle of paragraph number 3 in the German original, there is the statement registered in the protocol, in the memorandum, that Minister President Colonel General Goering, as Commissioner for the four-year plan, by authority of the Führer and Reich Chancellor, granted 18th October 1936. As regards the war economy, Minister President Colonel General Goering sees it as his task within 4 years to put the entire economy in a state of readiness for war. The exhibit which I have just read is of interest because of another document that has just been brought to the attention of the prosecution. It is a note for the files dated December 2, 1936, written in longhand on the letterhead of Prime Minister Colonel General Goering, and is in the handwriting of Colonel Bodenschatz, Goering's Chief of Staff. I offer this memorandum as United States Exhibit 580. It is our document 3474 PS. And I direct the tribunal's attention to the fact that the date of this document is the 2nd of December, 1936. That it was a conference, apparently, at which all the chief officers and generals of the Air Force, German Air Force, met. Besides the defendant Goering, there was General Milch, General Kesselring, Rudel, Stumpf, Christensen, and all the top commanders of the Air Force. And I read, world press excited about the landing of 5,000 German volunteers in Spain. Official complaint by Great Britain. She takes up connection with France. Italy suggests that Germany and Italy send each one division around the ground troops to Spain. It is moreover necessary that Italy, as interested Mediterranean power, issues a political declaration first, a decision only to be expected in a few days. The general situation is very serious. Russia wants the war. England rearms speedily. Command, therefore, beginning today, höchste Einsatzbereitschaft. Apparently, the translator did not see fit to translate that word, whose meaning is the highest degree of readiness, regardless of financial difficulties. Goering takes over full responsibility. Ruhe till 1941 is desirable. I advert again, if Your Honors please, the translator did not translate Ruhe, which is peace, absolute quiet, till 1941. However, we cannot know whether there will be implications before. We are already in a state of war. It is only that no shot is being fired so far. End of quote.
Perhaps that would be a convenient time to break off.